Juliet and Ken were inseparable from the first moment they met. From the moment their eyes met, they knew they were made for each other. The bond that unites them is so strong that nothing, no one will be able to separate them. Ken is an 11-year-old German Shepherd, to be precise, with beautiful dark eyes and a dense brown coat that never goes unnoticed. And although Ken does not speak, the way in which he managed to communicate with his beloved Juliet is able to make even the most skeptical surrender to the evidence of how special animals can be, and the bonds that we humans forge with them. But what Juliet Pride, a 35-year-old renowned landscaper who was about to get married, could never have imagined was how her dog would deliver the saddest and most important news of her life, choosing the most inopportune moment and causing all her plans to be cancelled at a moment's notice. To get to the beginning of this beautiful story, we must go back 10 years, when after receiving a call from a good friend of the family, Juliet came to the rescue of a precious German Shepherd, barely a year old, who was about to be euthanized for having borne a malformation of one of his hind legs. That dog was Ken, a dog whose destiny was to serve the army in tracking and searching for missing persons in emergency situations, but who, due to his injury, was condemned to exile while still a puppy. As soon as she saw Ken's small, furry face, Juliet knew she would never feel lonely again, and her heart filled with love for this creature she promised to care for and protect until the end. "I will take care of you, little one. I'll never leave you," were the first words Juliet said to her dog, a pledge of love and loyalty that she would strive to keep for all the years she and Ken were fortunate enough to share a life together. Juliet had just finished her career as a landscaper and had bought her own home outside the small town of Gorham, New Hampshire, when she adopted Ken and went on to become the owner of one of the most special dogs she had ever met. Being an only child and having grown up in a farming family, Juliet had always been surrounded by animals: cows, pigs, sheep, horses, cats, and dogs. The rural and peaceful life her parents offered her was the greatest gift they could give to someone like her, who knew from an early age that her life would always be linked to nature, and whose greatest dream was to be able to help others create peaceful and harmonious environments in which to live. That's why Juliet became a landscape designer and returned home to Gorham after studying at one of New York's top universities. Her plans were to start her own landscaping business and lead a quiet, solitary life near her parents while working on fulfilling her dreams. And so she did, at least for a while. Juliet returned home full of dreams and career aspirations, but she had nothing planned when it came to love. She had always been a lonely girl and had never had a steady partner. It didn't seem likely that she was going to have a family anytime soon, let alone fall in love with someone from the town she grew up in. In her world, there was only room for three things: her dog, her family, and her job. And it was that way for many years. It didn't seem likely that Juliet would set her eyes on any creature other than her dog. But it was clear that fate had other plans for her, for she was not going to fall in love once, but twice. The first, a charming four-legged being with a beautiful smile and abundant black hair, who would never leave her side, not even to sleep: Ken. And the second, much less furry, but just as charming, and who would end up becoming her first and only great love: Harry Spellman, an architect whom she met while working on the restructuring of a client's garden. The love between Juliet and Harry came unexpectedly and naturally. It was a crush, as if it were a romantic comedy. From the moment they met, everything between them was perfect. Even Ken, who had always shown a certain distrust towards men, something understandable considering that it was a man who abandoned him when he needed him the most, seemed to be delighted with the person his owner had chosen and had accepted him into her life without any problems. They loved each other so much and were so eager to start creating a family that only a year and a half after they met and started dating, Harry asked Juliet to marry him, and she accepted without batting an eyelash. Of course, during that unforgettable moment for the couple, Ken was also present, making it very clear that he would also be part of the new life that the couple was going to build together. The bond between the animal and his owner was so great and special that even in such an intimate moment with her future husband, she did not want to leave the animal out. "Did you hear that, Ken? We're going to a wedding," Juliet said excitedly to her dog, who looked at her excitedly as Harry hugged her and put the engagement ring on her finger. The wedding date was set, the venue chosen, and the decorations prepared. Everything seemed to be ready for Juliet and her beloved Harry's big day. The whole town was excited about the wedding, and everyone had contributed to the management of the event, so that Juliet's wedding would be as special as she wanted it to be. But a dark event was to overshadow everyone's joy and completely change the course of events in a most unexpected way. It was less than 24 hours before the wedding was to take place, and Juliet was finalizing some details of the organization of the tables at the reception with the help of her mother. She had been going back and forth all week to make sure everything was perfect. The flowers, the menu, the setup, the guests, the photographer, etc. She had everything under control. Well, almost everything. During the whole wedding planning process, there was someone who suffered more than anyone else from Juliet's unusual absence. Her dog, Ken. Used to spending all his time with his owner, Ken had missed Juliet a lot over the past few weeks, and his mood had been getting worse as the days went by. But everyone was so excited about the wedding and so stressed out getting everything ready that they didn't notice the dog's sudden change in attitude. Even Juliet didn't seem to notice that her Ken, her best friend, and the one who has always been with her for the past 10 years, was different. But dogs have their own way of communicating with their owners, and Ken, probably one of the most intelligent dogs ever, found a way to get the attention of his owner and the other guests at the event, even if it was too late for him. The night before the wedding, Juliet was feeling exhausted from the preparations and nerves typical of a bride before her wedding day, so she decided to go to bed early to try to get some rest. She put on her pajamas, turned off the lights, and crawled into bed. She was about to close her eyes and fall into a deep sleep when Juliet realized that something was missing. Or rather, someone. Ken was not in the room. And that was really strange, because since the day she adopted him, the dog had never left her side, not even to sleep. Every night, after crawling into bed and tucking in the covers, Ken would climb in and fall asleep at her feet, next to her feet. There wasn't a single night that wasn't like that. Except that day, Ken seemed to have disappeared. Frightened by her dog's repeated absence, Juliet jumped out of bed and started looking for him around the house. But she didn't have to go far to find him. Ken was sleeping on the rug at the foot of the stairs on the second floor of the house. Juliet's room was on the second floor, so the animal had always had to climb the stairs to get there. He had never fallen asleep there. But there's a first time for everything. "Ken, honey, what are you doing here? What's going on?" asked Juliet, approaching her dog and caressing his face. The animal woke up at the sound of his owner's voice and looked at her with a tired look on his face. He was still sleepy, but as soon as he recognized Juliet, he began to wag his tail and licked her hand affectionately. This reassured her, as that was the way Ken usually greeted her. However, there was something strange about the dog's attitude that didn't quite convince her. When instructed to follow her into the room and climb the stairs with her, Ken hesitated. He got up easily, but as he climbed the first step, He stopped, and after staggering slightly on his hind legs, he stood there, staring at his owner. "Come on, boy, get up. It's time to rest." Juliet encouraged him, gesturing with her arms for the dog to keep climbing. Ken remained still, staring at her for a few seconds, and then followed her up the steps with some difficulty. Juliet looked at him with concern and felt her heart flutter at the sight of her dog walking like that, but she didn't want any more importance than necessary. After all, Ken was 11 years old and suffered from a malformation in one of his hind legs that had always caused a slight limp. It was logical to think that with the passage of time and the aging of his body, this injury would get worse. But deep in her heart, Juliet felt she was turning her back on a much bigger problem that she didn't feel capable of dealing with at the moment. She was so looking forward to what was going to happen a few hours later, and wanted so much to be able to share it with her dog, her best friend, and biggest supporter for over 10 years, that she decided to forget about what had just happened and just go to sleep. "We still have a lot of time and a lot of things to experience together, Ken. I'm sure it's nothing serious, and tomorrow you will walk better," she said, trying to convince herself. Unfortunately, that extra time Juliet thought she had was going to run out much sooner than expected, and in a way that would leave them all speechless. The big day had arrived, a Saturday in mid-October. The ideal time of year to get married without having to worry too much about the cold and enjoy the beauty of an autumn landscape. Juliet was a landscaper and had all those details in mind when choosing her wedding day. She was a lover of control and had prepared so precisely that it seemed impossible for anything to go wrong. But not even someone as careful as her was able to avoid what was about to happen. The ceremony was about to begin, and Juliet was already waiting at the door with her father and Ken to make her grand entrance and marry the love of her life. The dog had also dressed up for the occasion and wore an elegant red bow tie around his neck. The wedding music began to play. It was the signal for Juliet to enter on her father's arm and followed by her inseparable four-legged friend. "Here we go, Ken. It's our big moment," whispered Juliet, beckoning the dog to follow her. Ken followed her, slowly walking beside her towards the door. Everything was going well. The guests were standing to see the bride enter. The music was playing, filling the whole space with a heavenly sound, and the groom was waiting at the altar, smiling and nervous. The ceremony was going as planned, until something brought everything to a halt. As they walked toward the door, Ken got in his owner's way and prevented her from walking any further. But that wasn't the strangest thing. "Ken? Boy, what's wrong? Why are you stopping?" said Juliet, a little upset. Everyone was looking at them, and the music was still playing, waiting for the bride who had stopped for no apparent reason just before entering. The dog had stood perfectly still in front of Juliet, and in his gaze she could see something she had never seen before in her dog: a deep sadness. Ken raised one of his paws, rested on his owner's legs, and then let out a long, sad howl that silenced everyone. The music ceased, and now the guests were not looking at the bride, but at her dog, who seemed to have a very important message to give her. So important that he couldn't wait for her to get married. "Ken! What's wrong with you?" shouted Juliet, bending down and getting close to her dog's face to listen to his breathing. Ken howled again. This time the howl was sharper. And then, needing no further explanation and staring into her dog's black eyes, Juliet knew. Ken was saying goodbye to her and asking her, in the only way a dog can, to wait for him. And what hurt the most was admitting that she might already know, but had refused to accept it for weeks. Even the night before, when all the danger signs were there, she refused to see them. "I have to go, Dad. Ken needs my help," Apologize to everyone. I don't know how long I'm going to be, but right now, all I care about is knowing what's wrong with my dog," Juliet said to her father, taking her dog in her arms and leaving them all open-mouthed, including the groom and her future husband, who watched her astonished from the end of the aisle without understanding what was happening. Without wasting any time, and without stopping to think about the commotion she was going to cause by standing up the groom just minutes away from becoming husband and wife, Juliet loaded Ken into the car and took him to the veterinary clinic. There, the doctor who had been treating the dog for years since Juliet adopted him told her the worst news anyone could receive, especially on their wedding day. "Ken has bone cancer, Miss Pride. As we already knew, he was born with a bone malformation in one of his hind legs. Then it was a benign lesion with no side effects on the dog's health. But now Ken is 11 years old, and that lesion has turned into something much more dangerous for him. A grade 2 osteosarcoma. I'm sorry, but it is inoperable," the vet told her with great regret. Juliet felt her whole world stop and her heart break into 1,000 pieces. Ken, her dog, her friend, her family, he was dying, and she could do nothing to stop it. "How much time do we have left, Doctor?" she asked, with tears in her eyes. "I wouldn't know. 6 months, or maybe even a year. It all depends on how the disease progresses. I have seen cases where the dog has lived several years with good treatment. We can give him medication to slow down the symptoms and prevent him from suffering. But nothing will prevent the disease from progressing to the end," he told her with regret. "He asked me to help him, you know. I was supposed to be getting married today. As you can see," Juliet said wryly, pointing to her wedding dress. "But he stopped me and talked to me in a way he've never done before, Doctor. I know you'll think I'm crazy, but I can't let him down. My dog deserves the best of endings, and I'm going to give it to him." "You're not crazy, Juliet. I am a veterinarian. I have been observing and caring for animals all my life. They have their own language, and only those who truly love and respect them can understand it," said the veterinarian, looking sadly at the dog. As she left the veterinarian's office, Juliet could think of only one thing: the time she had left with Ken, and being able to ensure the best quality of life for him as the disease progressed. But there was another matter she had to take care of urgently: her wedding. She was still wearing her wedding dress and sat on a bench next to Ken, thinking about what had happened that day. "Harry must hate me right now. I've abandoned him, and I haven't even explained why," she said to Ken, stroking his ears. The dog was still weak, but the medication he had been given was starting to take effect, and he was walking better. He even seemed to be smiling again. But the day's surprises were not over yet. "I will never hate you, Jewel," said a sweet voice behind her. It was the voice of Harry, the man who at that moment should be her husband. He was still in his wedding dress and looked very sad. "Your father told me where you were and what was going on. You don't have to apologize. Ken is your family, and so is mine. His welfare is the most important thing." "What did the vet tell you?" he asked. After explaining everything the doctor had told her, Harry became very sad and tried to cheer up his fiancée by telling her about the possibilities that medicine offered at this time. But Juliet was far from feeling better again. The sadness she felt about her dog's illness was too great. "I dreamed of marrying you by walking my dog down the aisle. Ken is my dog, my brother, my son. He is everything to me. And now I will no longer be able to fulfill my dream, and he will gradually lose the vitality he has always had." "It's all ruined," Juliet said in tears, petting her dog endlessly. And it was then, watching his fiancée cry for her best friend, that Harry knew exactly what he should do. You can still fulfill your dreams, sweetheart. We'll get married today, right here, right now. I just have to make a phone call. It won't be as nice as you had planned, but Ken will be with you, with us. What do you say? Will you be my wife in this beautiful park? Harry asked, kneeling down in front of Juliet with a big smile. Woof! Barked Ken. Juliet laughed and nodded vigorously. Of course I do. I'll always want to marry you, no matter the place. And Ken agrees too. Let's do it. That same afternoon, with no witnesses other than their dog Ken and the mayor of the city, Juliet and Harry were married, making her biggest dream come true: to share her wedding day with her dog. They were married alone in a beautiful suburban park. For many, it would be a terrible and pathetically organized wedding, but for Juliet, it was perfect because Ken was able to be by her side. Her dream come true. The veterinarian's diagnosis was correct, and Ken was able to live another year and a half with his family. One spring afternoon, he left this world in peace and feeling very loved by all who were lucky enough to know him. Juliet felt her heart break as she said goodbye to her dog, but she also felt deeply grateful for the love and friendship Ken had given her throughout her life. In their hearts, Ken will always live on, for only those who are forgotten die, and they never will. It is proof that love keeps us together forever. Do you like this touching and surprising story? If so, we invite you to leave us a comment expressing your opinion. If you want to continue enjoying inspiring stories like this one, subscribe to our channel or check out the other videos shown at the bottom of the screen. Thank you for your cooperation,